Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have the tennis nerd on, Jonas. Jonas, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Will.
So we first met a couple years ago in Austria at the headquarters. We were there with Tennis Warehouse reviewing the new Gravity at the time, and then we recently were fortunate enough to go to San Luis Obispo. I always have trouble with that name. To the Tennis Warehouse headquarters to review some shoes as well as the new Pure Drive 2025. And we had a really good crew out there. It was a ton of fun. And I wanted to have you on to talk about your specialty, talk tennis rackets, a little bit of strings as well today, because it's a really popular topic. I actually get a lot of questions on this and have, over the last a couple years ago, hired a racket technician to help me with this stuff because it's so kind of over my head and not my area of expertise. But I'm excited to dive into this with you and kind of help the listeners maybe get started experimenting a bit with different rackets. So I want to start with the most simple question that we've talked about in the past that you're going to tell us why it's actually not a good question. What is the best racket for doubles?
Yeah, this question comes up in any category, right? It's like, what's the best racket for the one-handed backhand? What's the best racket for the serve? And it's obviously like a personal choice, right? Like a personal taste. Everybody's very different. Like you can even look at the pro level. Medvedev's technique and Alcaraz's technique, they're both good. They both work top 10 tennis, but they're different and they use different rackets to accommodate the technique. That's what they're used to. It's muscle memory. So best racket for anything, it doesn't really exist. The best racket doesn't exist. Like today, most rackets are very good. So it's about finding what works for you. What do you feel like comfortable with? What do you feel confident with? What works for you in terms of results? Sometimes people just try a racket for 5 minutes and they're like, I hate it, which is fine. You know, if you don't like a racket after the first hit, although give it more than 5 minutes, you should maybe not switch to it. But overall, it's like it has to work for you. It has to feel right and has to play right for you. So there's no best racket, sadly.
Unfortunately. So if somebody's listening to this and they want to, let's say they've played with the same racket for 5, 10 years, maybe they buy the newest generation, but they want to test different brands, maybe, or different rackets. How should they start kind of experimenting? What you gave them one tip there, test it for more than 5 minutes. But how would you have this person start experimenting and testing out different rackets, maybe to find something that suits their game a bit better?
It's complicated because there's so much choice. So you're hopefully starting somewhere. Like you have to start by looking at yourself, like what is my level? What do I have any injuries? Like, do I need a softer racket maybe for your tennis elbow, where stiff rackets can be a bit problematic? Strings also factor into this. So you have to start with yourself, like maybe record yourself, which is always good to improve, to get some data. Like, okay, I'm not so good with my forehand, my backhand I'm feeling very comfortable with, and also maybe, sorry, also maybe not stray so far from where you are originally because your muscle memory has set in with a certain racket. And if you're going to a completely different racket, it can work out, but it can also feel very different. So yeah, I would suggest like reading up a bit. Tennisnerd, Tennis Tribe, there are many sites now covering this, YouTube channels as well. You can watch the reviews, get a little bit of an idea of rackets so you have a basic understanding. You don't need to go deep. And then maybe pick like a few models, unless you have a coach. Maybe you can discuss with the coach, but pick a few models. Like, yeah, these 4 would be good to try. You can get a demo from Tennis Warehouse, for example, maybe some other brands as well. And then you get a little bit of a sense, because a lot of people, they have not tried many rackets. They've maybe played with 2 rackets in their whole life. And so it's very hard to, unless you get like a ballpark of kind of, this is where I am, this is what I should try. So that's how you have to start the narrowing down process, right? Look at yourself first and then figure out like, okay, maybe these 4, and then you keep testing.
Okay. So I want to go through a few kind of types of players, and we can maybe recommend several racket options that they could start with potentially, or handle it however you'd like. So one is, recently I had a call with a 3-5 player. Let's say this 3-5 player is in there around 50 years old, maybe 45, 50 years old. They're in decent shape. they have started playing tennis again the last several years. Maybe they played in high school or something like that. And again, a 3-5 skill level. And they play your traditional 3-5 tennis. They'll serve and stay back. They have to be at the net when their partner's serving, or they don't have to, but they choose to. They're at the net when their partner's returning. So kind of an all-around game. But they haven't tested any rackets over the last 30 years. What are a few rackets maybe that they should start testing with?
I would go with like the most popular models generally. Like I would just start there, try a Babolat Pure Aero 100 square inch, try a Yonex E-Zone that's a bit more flatter trajectory, and maybe try a more controlled racket, a Blade 98 or Blade 100, just to see, because even at, I would say, lower levels, you can still feel more connected to like a control racket. So it's a very personal thing. I mean, most people will say you will get more help from a powerful racket, but for some, it's tricky to control because they don't have topspin.
I think one thing a lot of people do maybe try to overrate, especially at the club level, is power. So a lot of players are constantly looking to hit the ball harder. And I talk about it on the podcast all the time when we're talking about strategy. Power is so overrated in doubles. Like if you're trying to win doubles matches, power is the last thing you should work on. Really, control and spin and overall strategy are so much more important.
Yeah, you should not really work so much on power also in singles matches, I would say, because like most matches are won based on consistency. It's all about consistency. That's really where most club level matches are won, unless you're like a 5-5. So I think take it easy. Don't worry so much about your power level. Just focus on getting the ball where you want it to go and build consistency and footwork. And I think then you should do well.
Okay, so we've got the Pure Aero 100, the E-Zone, which is also 100 square inch, and then you said maybe the Blade 98, the 16 by 19 version, I guess.
Yeah, you can try the Blade 100 as well. Now the 100 is quite you're gonna get a bit more control than the Aero or the E-Zone, for example. So just try a little bit more feel and control with the blade.
We were talking about head sizes, so I wanted to ask, I guess, how do you recommend people think about head sizes? So if somebody hasn't experimented with rackets a lot and they've been playing with a, let's say it's like a 97, 98 square inch racket that maybe they had in high school back in the 2000s or something, how do you recommend they maybe upgrade to something a little more forgiving, or should they stick with that 97, 98 square inch frame? What do you recommend for head sizes?
I think always going a bit larger in head size, unless you're already maybe at 100, because I think 100 you're gonna get a lot more like sweet spot size and a little bit more help and forgiveness. Especially in doubles where you have to have quick reactions, and like a 97 or a 95, which is like a lot of like the older rackets, can really feel like you're if you have to have really fast hands, you're missing just a little bit outside. It's super demanding, quite unforgiving. So I think for like, especially for doubles, which is pretty fast moving, I think like 100 square inch head size should be the starting point. And then if you need like control, you can go down to 98. And if you need even more help, you can go to 137, which is a big baba, which you so cleverly recommended. No, I'm joking. But like then you can go up a bit beyond the 100. But I think 100 is the starting point. That is the main head size these days. And then you go 98 for more control, or you go above for even more power, even more forgiveness. But 100 can give you like a bit of like best of both worlds. You can have a control 100, you can have a powerful 100, you can have a spin-oriented 100.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think so. I've had this theory about like my own game, and I want to test it with you. Tell me if you agree or disagree. So I played with the Speed Pro for I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and then tried switching to a 98 racket, but I'm not on the court that much. Like I'm on the court playing tennis once a week on average, maybe. And I found that because I was downgrading to a smaller head size and I'm not playing enough, I'm just missing that sweet spot a bit too much since I'm not playing enough tennis. So I had to switch back to the Speed Pro, which immediately I enjoyed more than what I was using previously. So it seems like maybe a smaller head size, you have to play a lot of tennis and really like have that kind of hand-eye coordination and that, I guess, finding that smaller sweet spot down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think a 98 is more demanding than people think. I think um, like 100 is going to be more forgiving. The head size is going to help you. Of course, it depends on how you drill the strings, if you want to be super technical, but without going super technical, if you're not playing like 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week and only really 1 to 2, I think playing with a 98 is just going to hold you back a little bit. I think that's really where maybe you can lose some points or have some shanks and stuff, because a 98 is pretty demanding to play tennis with. And I definitely think there are enough control oriented, like in between rackets, like the head speed or the blade 100, as I mentioned, where you get a little bit of everything, So if you're not sure about whether you want to go 98 or you want to go heavy power, then you can go in between. So that's where I would recommend you start in the middle, and then you can branch to different directions after that, depending on your preference.
So I want to start with a new player profile here. So let's think about a 4-0 player. So they're a little bit higher level than that 3-5, still maybe intermediate. And they're in their 30s. They're very fit. They're athletic. They're fast, but they like to get to the net a lot. So they probably need something a little more maneuverable, and something with good control at the net. What are several rackets for that type of player?
Yeah, if you're pretty athletic and you can generate some good pace, I think you can maybe start with a 98. I mean, you can still play 100, like the 100 Speed Pro, like you're using the head. Speed Pro is controlled racket, like it's 18-20 string pattern. So then the string pattern takes care of a little bit of that. You have another example in the Yonex Percept 100D, which is like 18-19 string pattern. But overall, like one super popular racket, like there are two very popular control rackets. Like you can start with the Blade, as I said, 98. A lot of people like that one. And you can also try a Radical MP from Head if you want to try different brands. And if you want a bit more power than that, you can try like a Yonex E-Zone 98. So you're within the 98 region. At 4-0, you should, depending on how athletic you are and how fast maybe you're learning the game and how much you're improving, I think a 98 can work. But I would say there's a lot of people who are like too macho to go to 100 as well. So I would say there are plenty of 100 square inch rackets that can work for a wide audience.
Do you ever come across? I play some of these people in USTA leagues or tournaments, or I have over the years. These kind of old school players, they might be in their like 50s or 60s, and they just serve and volley on everything and get to the net on everything. They basically never don't use a continental grip. And a lot of them I find have like a 95 square inch head size that they grew up with in the 90s or something like that. If there's anybody like that listening to the show, do you recommend that they try something a little bit more forgiving? Or do you feel like, I don't know, do you ever like run into this type of player and have recommendations for them?
Yeah, if they're open to that, like I think a lot of people are kind of stubborn with the racket choice, right? Like, I mean, my father, he plays with the 95. My stepfather, he plays with the 95 N code 1618. It's from 2001, maybe. It's a great frame, but it's unforgiving, and he tests everything I have almost. Now I'm trying to like push him to test. Now he doesn't want to test anymore because he gets confused and he plays more than I do. But so sometimes you're so stubborn, you just want to hold on to this. Like, if this feels good, it feels at home, because tennis has such a personal feeling to it. A frame can have a really personal affection to it as well. But overall, I really think your game can take a step up with some more help from the frame. Like I think we're seeing this on pro level, and we should see this also on the rec level player. I've had friends who are pretty good players, maybe a bit more than 4-0, but they've played with like a 6-1, like the Pro Staff Classic, that Edberg marketed back in the day and many pros used. And he switched to like an Aero 100, which I talked about before. And he's like, it's crazy how much easier tennis is today. It feels so much easier. So I definitely think you need to try to demo at least and consider like giving it a proper try, not like trying 5 minutes, but actually proper trying it will help you, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. What about for senior players? So I know I have some listeners who are in their 60s, maybe even 70s, and they're like a 3-0, 3-5 player. They're not as mobile as they once were. They're at that level of doubles. There's a lot of lobbing. It's a little bit slower pace game. What kind of specifications should they be looking for? And then if you have any racket recommendations for them.
I think going oversized is pretty good. I think they can still play with 100 if it's light enough and stuff. Like you can get like many different brands that are covering the 100 square inch range. But if you were looking at going oversized, like I tried the head speed team, for example. So if you look at some models, they call the lighter models team. Babolat also does this. They're not quite as light as the head team rackets. But so one of the rackets I tried, which was my favorite, I think, light racket. This is 270 grams. It's probably 9.6 ounces. I'm not sure exactly about the ounce conversion there, but super nice feel. 105 square inches, easy to play, but like you have this kind of addictive sensation. You can place the ball pretty well as well. So I think like going up towards oversize, the range is usually like up to 106, 107. Then you get to oversize. Like 105 is still a mid plus by some I don't know who made that rule, but that's how it is. But like going up 105 to 110, I think is pretty good, even to 115, and see how that plays. There's like Babolat Pure Drive 107, which is a like very nice racket at the net, super stable. You get some good pop on serves, and it's lighter, so it's easier to swing. I think you need a little bit of help to get that movement going, but it all depends on your physicality. But if you feel like, okay, I have a shorter swing, I need a racket to do more. There's a famous one called the Head TS. Is it TIS6? The Head TIS6. Yeah. That's you see everywhere. It's like I probably can buy it at Dick's Sporting Goods or somewhere, right? Like it's 89 or 99 bucks. And it's like a massive head size, and it looks like a squash racket with how the strings work. But it's easy to play, and it's like if you have a short swing, if you're just bunting the ball and you get to the net, like you can play with this racket. So I think giving yourself a little bit of grace and some help from the frame is important. The older you get, that's what I'm trying to convince my father to switch, but he's not doing it. So I don't know. It's sometimes people are stubborn.
So what about you mentioned the weight of the racket. How does that factor into our decision making if we're trying to start experimenting? If I'm looking at two different rackets, one weighs a little more, what is that going to do for me? What is that going to do for my game?
Yeah, this is a tricky topic. Most people love heavy rackets. Like we did a video on the Tennisnerd YouTube channel, like why heavy rackets are better. It was kind of a provocative statement that I don't believe in myself 100%. But my friend Daniel was like, I have to play with, he's German, so the heavier the better, like you have to be a man, stuff like this. Very joking aside, like some people just love a heavier racket. They love how it feels. They're going to have a bit more stability. And usually if you have a smaller head size, you need more weight on the frame, because otherwise it's going to become completely unstable. But the larger the head size gets in the racket, the lower the weight can be. So you can actually get stability from the frame itself. Like it helps you. We talked about the Big Baba, which was like super light if you look at the static weight, but lots of weight was in the hoop because the hoop is so big, right? So I think the most important factor in tennis rackets is like where the weight is placed. So if there's loads of weight in the head of the racket, that's going to make it cumbersome to swing. And that's a factor called swing weight, if we get into technical terms. And that's something you should consider, because like you can have a racket that looks very light on paper, but the swing weight is quite high. So it's still like a hefty racket to swing. You hear it in the word swing weight, right? So that's quite important. It's like picking a golf club, it's something to consider. I would say, like, if you really got used to playing with a certain weight, it's going to be tough to maybe reduce it or increase it in a big way. You want to keep within the parameters of your existing racket. But overall, I think the trend of going down in weight is generally something we're going to keep seeing, and for a good reason, because it's easier to play with, easier to swing.
So for swing weight, if it's a higher swing weight, it's more difficult to swing. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then, so players who need a higher swing weight are going to be like pro players, right? Like they're physically fit, they have faster swings. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, if we go into the pros, like the older guys, like the old guard now kind of retiring slowly. We talk about Djokovic, he's on his last years, being coached by Murray, who retired earlier this year. They're both in the 360, 370 range. This is so that's pretty high. So if we look at, like, you can almost convert it to grams, but not quite. But that's a very high swing weight. But then you go down to Alcaraz, for example. He's close to 330. That's strong swing weight. And Sinner is 340. So the younger generation is going down. Like, they're swinging faster, so they can generate enough power anyway. While the older guys, they had higher swing weights because they get more power and don't have to swing it as fast, But the issue, if you have a high swing weight as a club level player, is that if you're late on the ball, it can start like bothering your wrist, maybe getting a tennis elbow. The weight can become a cumbersome thing, right? Also, getting it on serve is usually more tricky. A heavier racket is trickier to serve with than a lighter racket, I would say, because you can whip a lighter racket faster through the air.
Okay. So it's not necessarily that the case that if I'm physically stronger, I should go with a higher swing weight. It's also about, timing and technique and things like that.
It's always about timing and technique. I mean, you can see, like, I play with a lot of juniors. I play 5-6 times a week, right? So I play with some juniors, and like, they look small and maybe not so built up, like they're maybe 14, 15, but they can still generate loads of power thanks to technique and footwork. Like, that's where a lot of the power comes from. So I wouldn't look at it like, oh, I'm a muscly guy that goes to the gym, I need to play with a 400-gram racket or a really heavy racket. It's more about, like, how is your footwork and your technique? Like, where is this coming from? And I would not try to play with professional tennis specs for club level players. That's generally an advice I have.
Yeah. We're going to get to some pro questions here in a second. I wanted to talk about, I guess, doubles, like specific shots. So volleys are super important in doubles. Volleys and doubles are different than singles volleys generally. A lot of times you're closer to the net. You're kind of just knocking the volley off without a whole lot of swing. Are there any specific, if we are more of a doubles net player, are there any specific rackets or specifications or things we should be looking for that might help us more at the net with those volleys?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because the bigger head size you go, the more forgiveness you have. So you can be a bit, like, you don't have to be ultra fast on, like, getting the racket in position, but you're obviously going to get more control if you play with a smaller head size. I think overall, if you look at high level doubles, most players seem to play around 100 square inches. Like, also on top level, I think most players play with 100 square inches. There are many exceptions to this, but at least the majority. And I think, like, not having it a too heavy racket, because when you need fast reflexes at the net. So if you're playing a net play as a singles player, you can maneuver the heavier racket because you don't have to have super fast reflexes. But in doubles, there's more unexpected things that can happen. Like, the guy, you're at the net and you suddenly get smacked towards your body, right? And you just need to react quickly. So you need, like, a little bit of two things, like somewhat light racket, but still stable. That's generally the two things you would look for. You want to look for a stiffer racket that has a bit more stability inherently, but it's still light enough so you can maneuver it, right? And that's different depending on the player, but those are the two things I would think more about as a doubles player than as a singles player, because the forgiveness will also help you on two things, like serve. You're going to help with a stiffer racket, you're going to get more power, but also the stability on the returns with the slightly higher stiffness, I think, because serves and returns, as we've talked about on my podcast, for example, is so important in doubles, even more maybe than in singles.
Sure. Okay. And that higher stiffness will be a little bit harder on, like, the elbow and shoulder, though, as well.
In most
if you've
cases,
had some injuries. Okay.
Yeah, in some cases, I would say, but it depends a lot on the string. So if you're, I think the string is even more important, because if you're like suffering from tennis elbow type stuff, you should generally try to maybe go off the polyester string if that's what you're using. Maybe try a gut or a multi-filament string, like, old school strings. You can even try these strings that are like half poly, half multi, which is like Technifiber Triax, for example. Like, so you can use the strings to reduce some of that, the issue with the stiffness from the racket. Not all stiff rackets create issues for players with elbows and stuff. No, it depends a lot on the dampening technology included in the frame, where the mass is weight like is placed on the frame. So there's a lot of like technical issues there. But overall, I think like you need like a little bit of stiffness to help you with the stability, especially at the net. I think that helps.
And you just mentioned, so this is a good transition. You just mentioned that strings might be even more important than the racket. The a lot of listeners, and I find this with a lot of club players. Earlier, you said a lot of players have only played with one, maybe two rackets in their whole life. But I feel like with strings, people know even less. I feel like a lot of people will go to their local pro and say, just string it with whatever you want. And they don't really think about it. So, how should we start experimenting with strings if we want to try to maybe find something with more spin or more forgiveness or comfort or power? What should we think about there?
This is it's a large topic because there's many different strings, but there are mainly two types, right? So you can go, if you don't have any arm issues, if you want more control, you can try polyester strings if you're not already playing. Most people these days play with polyesters, I would say. That's the most common string. Usually they have funny colors. Sometimes they're silver, but sometimes they're red, yellow, orange, whatever. And there's so many different strings. So there's softer polyesters, which will give you a bit more power, but they don't last as long. And there's stiffer polyesters that really like hold tension better. They can stay longer in the racket, but they can have a little bit of like issue with creating power and can be a bit hard on the arm. So those strings would generally be strung lower, right? So there's many factors you can play around with. You can choose the different strings. You can even do two different strings, so you have a hybrid setup, and you can change the tension. So I think like if you go back 10, 15 years, one of the biggest issues that creates tennis elbow and stuff like this is like people stringing the rackets too high. I think that's still going on. So I generally advise people to consider going down, like, a few pounds, 4 pounds, 6 pounds, see what happens. Because like if you're playing a polyester, the string works better and kind of harder in a way if you're stringing it lower. You let the string do more. So there's more pocketing in the string bed, sweet spot expands a bit, and you're going to have a little bit more of that like spin, like slightly higher launch angle, like the ball goes up a little bit, but the ball then dips down, which is kind of like addictive spin. So unless you're playing with a multi-filament or a gut string, I think going down in tension could be a game changer for a lot of people. Even if you play with the same string, like you play with this string for 5-10 years, whatever, but maybe dropping the tension, if it's a polyester, could be something that really helps you.
Yeah.
But overall, like start maybe here you can buy 3-4 different strings and try, because it's not as much of a cost as a racket is.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, that's funny you say that. I remember this was like 15 years ago at this point, almost. In college, I strung my rackets. I think it was like 61 or 64 pounds or something like that. And I was using a synthetic gut and a poly hybrid. And now I'm down to 51. I've even experimented in the 40s a bit. Um, so for somebody listening who has, let's say they've been playing with poly for a while, maybe their tension's okay. Maybe they're in the low 50s or high 40s or something like that, but they're starting to have elbow issues. What are some of the better, maybe soft polys or hybrid setups that they could try out?
Yeah, you can always try adding like a multi-filament or a gut string to your already existing string. So instead of doing the whole bed in the same string, let's say you're playing SLO Power, which is one of the most popular strings, but also a very stiff string that can create arm issues. And if you still like the string, you can put gut, which is more expensive but holds tension better, or a multi-filament like Wilson NXT, Yonex Rexis, Babola XL. There are a bunch of them. You can put that in the mains to get even more power, even more comfort, or in the crosses just to mute a little bit of that harshness. So like the string that is in the mains is the main ingredient. If you see it as a dish, right? So you put the mains, the main ingredient, the crosses are like the sub ingredient. So if you have a softer string in the mains, you're going to get a lot more power and some good comfort, even if you use your standard poly in the crosses. So I would start maybe doing a hybrid. And if that is still like an issue for your arm, you can try like a softer polyesters. Yonex Polytor Pro, yellow one, is usually quite soft. Wilson Revolve Spin is very soft string if you talk about the popular brands. Tourline, it's like an upcoming brand that makes pretty soft strings in pretty nice colors as well. But you can also, if you're really feeling like, okay, I need to give my elbow a break, but I still want to play. Like I still want to play tennis. I really recommend trying a multi-filament string. Like do a full bed. I tried it the other day. You can still play pretty decent. You can still generate spin. That's how people played in the 90s until Guga Kuerten came with the big banger, All the Power in 1997. I think that changed a lot of the tennis scene. But you can definitely play with a multi still. There's some really good ones out there. So you can experiment to see until your elbow gets a bit better. Then you can maybe go back on the poly train. But be careful.
You mentioned the Yonex Polytour Pro, and you said the yellow version is a good one. So are there like different colors that play differently within the same exact like family of string?
Yeah, so the additive of the color, right, makes the string slightly different, and that's
Oh,
generally also the case with rackets. So if you paint a racket black, it's gonna be playing a bit different than a blue.
hmm.
I mean, something maybe some noticed with the new East zones, like the outgoing version of the East zone, is that they had the blue one, but then they released the Aqua Night, which is a black version, and it plays slightly stiffer. Like if you're sensitive to this stuff, if you play, I test hundreds of rackets, then you feel it. You feel like, okay, this is a
Hmm.
bit stiffer. And the same with strings. So if a yellow string, it's generally this case, like the deader the color, like so it's black or dark gray, you're gonna have more control. The string is gonna be deader in itself. It's gonna like have less liveliness to it. But if you go like
Hmm.
yellow or bright green, the string, as its color, funnily, is more lively. So it has more elasticity. It's gonna give you a little bit more of a trampolining. And this, when we're talking percentages, but still, it's noticeable, right? So
Interesting. Yeah, I'd never heard that before. That's wild. Um, so let's move on to some of the pros. So, uh, talk to us about. I know this is pretty common knowledge for some people, but I know a lot of people don't understand this. So, the pro players are not using the exact racket that they're, I guess, endorsing. Um, Talk about the process that pros go through to get rackets made, and what are they actually playing with?
yeah, so if you think about it logically, like if you're a professional tennis player and your livelihood is winning tennis matches, you wouldn't want to risk that every 2 years by getting used to a new racket every time, right? So every
Yeah.
2 3 years, sometimes for the racket companies will release a new version. They might have tweaked something inside the racket, which is called the layup, so the layup of carbon, or they might have changed even the structure of the racket, which is the mold of the frame, which will make it play quite significantly differently, right? So in some cases, it's a small change. In some cases, a big change. The blades, for example, version 8, version 9 was a small change. You could probably switch in between them with just a slight difference. But if you go like Yonex V Core, the 21 version versus the 23 version was quite a big difference. Like it's very different on how the racket gave you like more spin or more power, less control. So the pros don't do that. They have their model. Obviously, they can try new things, and some pros change. I consult some pros also, like if they want to change rackets, what they should change to. But they usually get their rackets painted in the new paint, and that's the
Hmm.
thing where I talked about the paint and the color, because sometimes the pros feel like the racket plays differently with a different color, even if it's the exact same thing underneath. And that's sometimes it's perceived, sometimes it's actually a little bit different. But and they're obviously playing millions and millions of shots. They have really sensitive arms. They know exactly where in the string bed they hit every ball. They're professionals. So obviously they want the racket to always be the same, always have the same. Like if they can, like maybe they have different string tensions, but the racket structure and the mold is always like supposed to be the same. Otherwise, they can really feel every small little thing. So they get them customized to their liking by the companies and
Hmm.
painted to make the consumer, such as you and me, feel like, oh, okay, so he's playing with the new blade or the new E zone or radical. So I should also get that because my favorite player is playing with that, but he is not. He's
Yeah.
playing with another model painted to look like that.
Okay. Got it. So I wanted to move on to some pro doubles. So I think uh, I've never studied this. I'm not sure if you have, like, how rackets differ on the pro doubles tour versus the pro singles tour. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yeah, I've looked into that. It's not wildly different, but I
Okay.
have noticed like that they tend to like a little bit stiffer frames overall. That's what I said about that. I think that makes sense.
Mm.
I think also their head sizes on average are a little bit larger. They're more 100 square inch rackets. I do see pros using like racket that could be used on the tour, but like on the singles tour as well. But overall, I think also a little bit lighter. So to have more maneuverability, to be a bit more ready to just touch the ball. In singles, you're going to have a bit more time. So you're running in between the shots. You have more time to get also into a rally and get used to something or get into a groove.
Hmm.
Doubles can be so quick. Like it's not really a game where you get a lot of chance to groove with a racket. So I think you need a bit of
Hmm.
a lighter frame overall. So the weights are a little bit lower on the doubles tour in my like research that I've done. Yeah.
That kind of makes sense to me. I feel like, so in a singles match, when you watch singles on TV, sometimes you'll see Sinner, especially like a Medvedev, like playing from so far back behind the baseline, and that just doesn't happen often on doubles. If it does, like you're lobbing from way back there, like you're not trying to rip a passing shot from that far back. Um, so I'd imagine if you're playing from that far back behind the baseline, you do need a bit more weight to help you generate that same amount of power. Whereas in doubles, you're never hitting that shot. You're never trying to rip it from 10 feet behind the baseline because it's just not a high percentage play.
No, there's like a far less like trying to rip shots overall, like trying to uh, be more aggressive from the baseline. I mean, you're trying to obviously find an angle or find like a place to lob or think on your feet, but you always have to be fast.
Hmm.
And it's a lot more obviously volleys, like even like half volleys, a lot more reactions. Players are closer to the net. They're more in the that middle ground where it shouldn't be really like that's what happens. So
Yeah.
so they need to react faster, and it's a completely different game in many ways, right?
I wanted to ask about Marcel Grenoyer's racket. This is one that's fascinated me. He's one of few players who still, I guess, endorses Prince. In his when I go and watch him from up close, I mean his racket looks so thin, and he's got those little O ports that Prince is known for, which is kind of weird to see from a professional player because I don't know if any. I don't know if Isner had that or not. I know he played with Prince for a while as well. You're shaking your head no, so I guess Isner did not have that. What is Grenoyer's playing with, from what you can tell?
I think he's playing with one of the older EXO series. So like it was a popular model
Okay.
that Prince made, which is quite flexible, but they made different generations. I have two pro stocks belonging to a pro in about one of the bags in my uh, wardrobe over there, but it's very like good on feel, I would say. It's like, so once I think those rackets with the ports have a lot of string movement. So the idea with the port is that the string should move a lot and give you partly good comfort. And they still do these rackets. Like they have done more aggressive versions of them called ripsticks now in the last few years. But they're supposed to give you like quite nice spin, quite good sensation. Strings don't last that long in these rackets compared to maybe regular grommets, but for the pros, that's not an issue. You get them restrung before every practice anyway.
Hmm.
So this is an old O-port, probably an like 100 square inch XO3 racket, which is super popular. I've sold, like I had a bunch in my racket stack, like and I've sold them to pros. Like people who are 150 ATP, they like, oh, I've seen you have that. Can I buy? you know,
Hmm.
because they're hard to find. And Prince, they don't really sponsor players, so I'm not sure if it's his personal stack or if Prince sent him still, but they don't really have like an ambassador endorsement budget anymore, as far as I understand.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Is it just me, or is it a much thinner racket than
It
most
is very
others on
thin. Like
tour? It
it's
is.
probably not like like crazy thin. Like there's some like Gravity Pro is 20 millimeters, and
Mm.
some rackets are around 21, like blades and stuff. But these
Okay.
can be like 19 to 20 millimeters. But the whole racket is very thin. So the profile of the racket makes it look, even with the O ports as well, obviously makes maybe a visual like illusion
Mm.
maybe of it being even thinner, right? But these are
Yeah.
rackets made for feel, like heavily based on like the feeling. And once you get into that feel, it's kind of tough to switch because it's a very strong personality in a racket, I would say.
Interesting. So a couple of players who didn't play together this year but did the past couple of seasons, Wesley Koolhof and Neil Skupski, they both used the Prestige, which um, is, as you know, a control-oriented racket for sure. Um, I like it a lot at the net, actually. And one thing I noticed is when Head came out with their newer models, they stuck with the older version, the all red version. I don't know if it was 2 or 3 versions ago. And it was like a brighter red. Do you know when players are doing this, is it because they hit with something and like didn't like the paint, or is there some other potential reason for that?
That's a very good question, actually. Like I'm a huge fan of the red Prestiges from 2019. That was my match racket for years, right? And which is a long
Mm-hmm.
time since I test everything that's new, but it has a very magical feel. However, Head could simply, with what they do for other pros, just send them a blacked out, like what the new 2023 Prestige looks like, and send it to Wesley, for example. So I don't know. Sometimes it's like I don't like the cosmetic. I want to stay with this. For the racket brands, it's not something they want. Like this happens sometimes. Like even Tiafo had a hard time switching to the Percept cosmetic. He was happy with his old one. You see it among doubles. Usually, when you're ranked high enough, you will get a pro stock racket. They will arrange for you the new cosmetic. They will send it out well ahead of time. You will get a bunch of rackets over a year. Sometimes they draw like a line of like, okay, you're top 400 in singles. Then beyond that, you're not getting like pro stocks easily. Depends on the brand, depends on things. But these guys should get they're top 10, right? Top 20 doubles players. They should be getting frames. So maybe it's something personal then. Like maybe it's like, oh, it's my lucky cosmetic. I still have these rackets. I don't like how the new one plays because it plays slightly differently in my head or in actual fact. So it's usually something very personal to the player. And it's kind of frustrating, I think, for the racket companies because they obviously want them to market the new ones.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know where that line is in doubles for pro players who are getting kind of pro stock rackets with the brands?
It's a great question. I don't know. It's something I can look into, but yeah, it depends on every brand as well. Like, and also sometimes
Sure.
they, like, if you're a younger up and coming star, you know, you're gonna get a bit better treatment than if you're like a has been or whatever. You know, it's not a
Yeah.
good word, but if they're like, obviously they're looking into it like as an investment, and sometimes pros that are ranked maybe like outside the 400 can get rackets as well. I've heard experiences. Like I
Yeah.
have a guy I know, a friend of mine who is annoying and Head doesn't want to send him any more rackets because he's asked for every racket to test in the book, right? So there's all kinds of stories there. I don't really know where the line goes there in doubles.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. I haven't talked to players about this specifically, but um, I think a lot of them like struggle to get brand deals anyways. I mean, I know we talked with the Tennis Warehouse team. They sponsor a few of the doubles players who are Grand Slam champions over the last several years, and they send them a lot of gear because a lot of them like are just now getting racket deals because they finally reached like top 10 or number one or won a Grand Slam. So it might be, yeah, even lower than we think, and probably does depend on the brand a bit. So Jonas, this conversation with rackets and strings, I can tell it's just such a complicated topic. There is no way somebody can just listen to this conversation and figure out, okay, I should definitely test these 3 rackets, and I'm absolutely going to love one of them. It's very specific to the player, just like double strategy, which I love. Where can people go to find out more about you and do a bit more research to figure out kind of where to start and try to test out new rackets and find a better fit for them?
Yeah, it's a complicated topic. Sometimes you find your first racket straight away, or like your favorite racket straight away. Sometimes it takes years, and some people never find it. Kind of, but yeah. So you can go to tennisnerd.net. There are loads of reviews. We have a gear guide, so with recommended rackets and strings. And if you want to get into the weeds with swing weight, balance, whatever, all these things are explained there. If you prefer videos, YouTube is the way to go. The Tennisnerd YouTube channel, there's loads and loads of content there over the years, where we try to explain as much as possible, like what all these things mean, because most people don't have time to weed down into all this. Some love it, some don't, right? So it's very much up to the person how much they want to invest in researching their next racket. But it's worth giving it some time, because I can really help you partly be pain free in some cases if you're playing with a setup that gives you some elbow issues or wrist issues or shoulder issues. But it can also be giving you a little bit more enjoyment from your tennis, a little bit more free points, and yeah, like sometimes a racket change can help.
Sure. Are you still offering consultations for anybody listening who maybe doesn't want to do all the research, but would happily like pay you
that's on
for
the
an hour of your time?
Yeah, exactly. So they can go on the website as well. There's links to that, the
Okay.
consultation. We still do that.
Okay.
It's a little bit the time iffy for me sometimes, because I really try to dig into it, and I'm doing
Yeah.
all of it. But I still like helping people, and I think it can be very valuable. It would be for me if I was in the same situation, just to like get someone to give me 4 options, and then I demo them and I find like one, and that's over. I'm done with it. I don't need to waste any more time with this. So I would
Yeah.
say it helps. Yeah.
Yeah. Seems like it could save a lot of time for some people. Awesome, Jonas. Thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. To everybody listening, we'll link to his website, Instagram, YouTube, everything in the show notes, including some of the rackets we talked about. Any final request of the audience or any parting words before we hop off here?
No, have fun, play tennis. That's generally it. Don't forget to do it. That's usually what I say in my videos. But overall, like, don't get bogged down in the racket jungle if we're talking about gear. But just focus on like getting a racket, then having fun, playing more and more tennis, and playing more and more doubles.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. I will talk to you all soon.
Thanks.